Good afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm really excited today to be joined by George Maffedon, who is the founder and the chief exec of Motivez. If any of you follow him on LinkedIn, you'll know he's basically famous. Somebody said that to me, George, the other day when I said I was interviewing him. I don't know him, but isn't he famous? I was like, yeah, he kind of is. But we're really looking forward today to having a really interesting, I hope, conversation about Motivez, why George set it up, what else he's doing. He's an award-winning engineer, and the challenges that Motivez is addressing and what more needs to be done in the sector around these sorts of areas and what's working well and what's not working well. And we'll have lots of time to have lots of questions from people, hopefully. So thank you very much for joining us today. And George, it's really, really great to have you with us. You set up Motivez in 2015, and you set it up as a way to help children and young people from underrepresented backgrounds into STEM jobs, basically. And alongside that, you are the race engineer for Formula E, and you were won the Young Engineer of the Year in 22-23. You're also a board member at the Hamilton Commission and the Co-op Foundation. But let's kind of go back to the beginning. And would you be able to tell us a little bit about the problem that you set up Motivez to solve, and why you set it up, and why it should have been you and it is you that is doing an amazing job? And then we'll talk a bit more about
that. That's a great question. In terms of, well, first of all, happy Friday, everyone. Lovely to, I won't say see you all, but know that you're all there. I see some familiar names as well, which is great. In terms of Motivez and where we set it up, the big thing for me and context was I was growing up in Peckham, Southeast London, and it's known now for rooftop bars and all of these great things, but back then and even now it's infamous for a lot of reasons. And I was surrounded by all the different vices in the area, and there wasn't too many outlets that you had or opportunities to explore your interests. There was a massive lack of social capital. I didn't know any engineers. I didn't know any technologists. Nobody that I knew, that was a software engineer, for example. That was just unheard of. I didn't know what that was. But what I knew was I was able to, so my brother was forcibly imprisoned for murder and 6 other charges. So at that point, I had to
say hashtag he's written an amazing book about it. Please go and buy the book.
Yes, exactly. That Peckham boy.
We'll put a link in the chat.
Yeah, exactly. And that happened, and that was my turning point, an opportunity to say, well, it's very easy to become a product of my environment. That was joint enterprise. So just by being from this area, I'm already at a disadvantage in some way. So I was trying to find a way out, essentially, and education was my bet. And when I started to do engineering at GCSE, so year 9, I was very kind of enthusiastic about it. I grew up fixing bikes, so that was a natural transition for me. It was either that or motor mechanics. And that's the only thing I knew at the time. I didn't know what engineering was, so there was a lack of exposure, but I stumbled on it, and my brother recommended it. And then from that point, it was a case of me getting into these industries like engineering and studying it, and then realizing that there was no one that looked like me or came from my background. So for me, race wasn't much of the issue. It was the fact that there was no one that even seemed like they came from my social class that I was studying with at UCL. So it was like there's a massive divide. So that's when we said, okay, how can we serve our way to the top? How can we ensure that other people have access to these opportunities that I've now got? I got 6+ scholarships to go to UCL. So it was like, I knew I had a massive advantage and massive privileges, and I wanted to give it to the young people as I was rising up in my career, as opposed to wait until I established something great and then try and do it. Because once you've done that, the gap's already too big and you're not as relatable as you once were. So I thought a technique would be get in early, make it youth-led. So before we knew what youth-led was, we were just doing it. And then eventually figuring it out along the way. But that's why we started, just to ensure that young people had a voice, and that this journey that was very lonely for me going into STEM, I didn't want that to be the case for millions of other people that might be interested.
So, George, can you make us all feel deeply, deeply like we've never achieved anything in life? How old were you when you set up Motivez?
We started, I was 17, 18.
Oh, yeah.
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 Actually, that's a big point. So the big reason why I started it, so initially I wasn't going to start anything. I was just going to go along the journey. It felt like a lonely journey into STEM. But I joined an organization called the Amos Bursary, which is a phenomenal organization that supported me and gave me all the personal, professional development support that I needed to feel confident. And then we had a conference in 2014, and they made us write our obituary, which could be a morbid task, but I was kind of 17, 18 at the time, writing this down. And I was like, nobody remembers the richest person that died yesterday. So me trying to acquire all this wealth would just be, it's not going to mean anything, right? It's about what the kids, for example, are going to feel once I've gone. What's my mom going to say about me? What's my brother going to say about me? What's the community going to say about me? And that's what led me to say, okay, I need to create something that allows me to express what I'm feeling at the moment, and a cause that I care about, which was making STEM cool, making STEM sexy, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. That should be the tagline of
Yeah, it should.
STEM sexy. And so tell us a bit more about what Motivez does. Like, what did you start,
Sure.
and where it is now? Because you're now working with worked with thousands of young people across London, and
Sure.
where are you hoping to take it?
So we first started out with the perspective of how can we think local at global. That was our first thought. So before anyone was developing technology and there was this whole digital transformation, we actually created an app. We didn't know how to create apps or anything like that, but we created an app on the Apple Store. You won't see it there now because we discontinued it in 2020. But before our work in 2020, we were literally focused on the technology and providing young people with access to opportunities at scale. So every week you would have thousands of young people essentially using this app to find events and opportunities this week, next week, and upcoming. That was how it started out, to just provide access to opportunities. And then we realized that they needed more programmatic support, because they would go to a networking event, not feel that confident, feel as though it's transactional, not know how to navigate these environments. So we essentially created an organization that had three main pillars. The first pillar being grassroots programs. So that's when we work with 14 to 16-year-olds, inspiring them to essentially go into STEM and show them how cool it can be, essentially. How old is your daughter, Lydia? Just asking a random question. But 14 to 16-year-olds, inspiring them to go into STEM. So we work with, for example, 50% of the schools in Southwark Council now. We're in Greenwich, we're in Lambeth. Amazing. Just getting into the bracket. I love it. So yeah, we work with them at that age just to make them know that they can do it. It's mostly women, mostly people that are underserved within STEM, and just show them that they belong in the industry. And we do that with our flagship program called Sustainable London, which started off as a pilot called Prosper in Peckham, and we've kind of just expanded it ever since. And we've also got bespoke programs with different partners like Johnson & Johnson or Kenview that want to do more work there, but be more specialized. And then we've got our employability programs, which is our second strand, which focuses on helping young people get their first apprenticeship, first internship, first graduate level job, so first entry level opportunity. For example, next Tuesday, we're taking 25 young people on work experience to explore essentially the world of tech, finance, how these kind of sectors intersect with one another. And we're trying to give them their first opportunity. So they're exposed to these environments, and essentially that is their first step on the career ladder. So we walk them through CVs, cover letters, assessment centers, the whole process, but make it accessible. Speak to them about the nuances that they're likely to face, and make it as comfortable as possible. So that's more of a career accelerator, I see that as, and we support them along their journey. And then the third level is advocacy. So for us, it's very important that we take all the insights that we have and use it to shape policy and get this systemic change essentially that we need to see. If we as an organization aren't trying to change the way government approach this, then we're just putting all the onus on the young people, expecting them to do everything when that's impossible, right? So that's why I joined the board of the Hamilton Commission. I was the youngest person on the board, and to make sure that we can improve representation in STEM and motorsport and shaping the government policies that come with that. So that's the main three levels that we work on at the moment. And yeah, our bread and butter is essentially programs and making them as effective as possible, but working with different partners that can essentially allow us to accelerate that change, because we can't do it alone. We need the support of people like the Fore and so many other people that have supported us here as well. I'm seeing Sam Lupton on the call, so even the Lupton Foundation, for example, has supported some of the work, which is phenomenal.
So George, how many young people are you working with a year?
So 1,500 to 2,000. So this year we aim to get 2,000. In Q1 we worked with 800 directly.
And what's your, because I know what your budget is this year or around about, and so it's basically less than £200 a person is what it costs. So
exactly,
unbelievably cost effective. Okay.
Exactly.
Anyone who's on the call who might be thinking of giving George some money, go for it.
Yeah.
And how many businesses are you working with at the moment? And
that is a great question.
Or what about? And
that's a great question.
Yeah, what exactly do you do with them? And what are the challenges with businesses?
Yeah, sure. So because our main piece is programs, we've also got our digital platforms and so forth, which are expanding. We got our new website launched. Feel free to check that out. It's pretty cool. But we've also got our e-learning platform that is under again partner with us from a content perspective and create content on that platform. But at present, how it works is at the grassroots or employability level, we have partnerships. So, for example, a new partner that just came on board is Spectrus Foundation. So they're supporting the expansion of Sustainable London. And with that, for example, we can get their employees involved from a volunteer engagement perspective or employee engagement perspective. So we will shape some of the theme of Sustainable London. We're looking at challenges surrounding sustainability and how that affects young people that are typically disproportionately affected by climate change. And like Peckham High Street, for example, is the 9th most polluted road in London, if you didn't know, for example. So we take as many of these insights and work with those kids to develop STEM-based solutions to tackle those challenges in and around their school. The mayor, for example, is now backing some of that work and putting some more funding into that space. So we're going in a good direction. Our partners come on board with volunteers, essentially, to be mentors for some of these kids as they develop their solutions. It can also be speakers if they've got subject matter expertise to actually inform the young people of what they should do. Sometimes it's career talk, sometimes it's speed networking at that grassroots level. At the employability level, sometimes they're supporting the young people with the actual subject matter expertise again. So it could be early careers recruitment teams that are supporting on some of our pre-employability programs. It could be working in breakout rooms with the young people to just give them that confidence, and the mentoring as well is a big part, and coaching at our clinics. There's so many opportunities for businesses to work with us. So yeah, they do it on all those different levels. I would say in terms of the bank of people that we have currently supporting us at the moment, there is more than 70 altogether, if you include the mentors that are active, if you include the mentors and volunteers that support across the different programs. And that's several companies, that's 12 plus companies at least.
Yeah. What do you find are the positives and what do you find are the negatives of working with in that, for example, it's amazing working with businesses from the perspective of getting the employee volunteering and the mentors and the skills out of them, but there are do they require quite a lot of reporting, or, are these businesses that you're working with then basically taking on some of the young people that you are training up through your programs? And do they, when they get into the businesses, are they finding that the businesses are set up to help them thrive, or are there challenges around that sort of thing?
Those are some great questions. So first of all, in terms of that employee engagement side, it's always great when they are committed to the work that we're doing. So they've come along with not just the volunteers, but they've come along with funding, and then it allows us to do that work for longer, for sure. So that's a big part of it, so that they actually commit. Once they have skin in the game, they want to get the volunteers and they don't just drop out randomly, for example, and we have to find some others. So that is one of the big things. And then in terms of some of these young people, how they get into their firms, we start off with work experiences being a big one. So for example, with Airbus, we've got a work experience coming up with them in May, for example. We have some of their volunteers on our program. So it starts off like that. And then some of these young people are fast tracked to assessment centers. It depends upon what stage of the year we're in, essentially. So sometimes we're fast tracking some people to assessment centers once they've done our employability programs. Once they get into the firms, we're currently exploring some more reverse mentoring because there's still cultural challenges in most of these firms. So almost every corporate or business needs some element of reverse mentoring when they're taking on these young people, in order to ensure that the environment and culture can really work with these people and get the best out of them.
Yeah, to explain a bit more what you mean by reverse mentoring.
Yeah, so the reverse mentoring at the moment, so we've got a pilot that we're designing with InterScience and UCL and a few others, Engineers UK as well. And the big part of that is, how do we ensure that senior leadership, essentially within these firms, whether it be engineering firm or corporate firm or tech firm, whatever it may be, have a better understanding from the early career staff of what it takes, what it is like to a day in a life of essentially an intern or a graduate, and they're essentially teaching the senior leader about what that is, as opposed to the other way around. So that's the reverse mentoring, and this proves very effective. One of my friends, Olu, actually set up at KPMG, and he did a phenomenal job. And through that, he set up what you call the Black Entrepreneurs Award, which gives out 25K to 5 businesses every year. And that came through a reverse mentoring process with one of the managing directors at KPMG. So now they give out, just shy of 150K or so every year, off the back of that reverse mentoring relationship to Black-led organizations, because he spoke about this. And that's what is allowing him to stay in the firm for longer. So they retain him more because he knows that they care about what he cares about as well. So it's trying to find a way for them to care, essentially. And how do you do that other than trying to have the conversations that drive that empathy?
Yeah, and just really understanding what it's like as, somebody who's come from a background where, you haven't grown up with huge amounts of money around, to work in a firm where everyone's expected to, live a certain type of lifestyle. And people forget, even if they came from that, if they're 30 years into their career and they're now very successful, I think people forget. They don't realize how much they forget of how intimidating the whole thing can be, and completely alien.
Exactly. So that's another thing that we're doing with some of our partner firms is, and it depends on the role that they get, but especially the grads, is for the first 3 months, and the apprentices, especially the apprentices, funnily enough, because their first time in that space, is taking them for their first 3 months and working with the employer to actually support that transition. So that's a big piece of work that we're trying to do at the moment, and it's difficult, but we're constantly working towards every employee that we work with to build that relationship. So that's the direction that we're going in order just to ensure that the teams that they're going into, really support them in the best way possible, and all the unspoken rules that they don't know of, we can kind of work with them through that, so they kind of just accelerate their journey and pathway.
Yeah, know what to expect and know how not to do something that is against the contrary,
Exactly.
the organization with absolutely no realization. Yeah.
Exactly.
Are you finding that businesses are much more open to this than they were? I mean, it has the last 3-4 years. Yeah, and also with, both with the wanting to partner, but also with the wanting to fund, because I think there, pretty much every business these days has it as a priority in terms of, oh, we must make sure we have a much greater diversity of employees, but actually, will they put money into making that happen? I think is not necessarily something that has quite kept pace with the headline priorities,
Yeah.
or an unfair thing to say.
What I've seen is, and the sentiment within the sector is that it's more of a pendulum. So
Yeah.
2020, the pendulum swung in the diversity's favor, and there was a lot of appetite because they wanted
Yeah.
to show that they were doing something. And then it kind of just goes back, even from a funder perspective, to the strategic priorities of the organization. And that's just how it goes until another situation comes about that causes them to prioritize it yet again. So I would say over the last 4 years, it was definitely easier in 2020 for an organization that was established or establishing themselves. And now it's somewhat harder, and your reputation has to be one of which they want to associate with, so that, from every angle, they look like they're doing great work, and they're getting their return on investment. But I do know, different organizations, for example, that would slash a budget by 30-40% and give the team the same goals. I'm not, as it pertains to CSR or whatever it may be. So it's very difficult. So what we try and do is really find a win-win from a recruitment perspective. So even though we're very much focused on the young people, a big part of why we joined the Fore and wanted the support was to develop our recruitment arm. So allowing us to get more of a win-win commercially, so that they feel as though they're getting the best talent, and they just so happen to be from backgrounds that they don't conventionally recruit from. So that's our approach to it, and that seems to work, just more for partnerships for early careers.
Yeah, I think I mean, we have exactly the same situation in that when we're basically offering, we work with a lot of corporates, and that's where a lot of the funding comes from, as you know, that we are distributing to innovative, high impact small charities like social enterprises like Motivez. But it's when they feel like they're getting a service, then they have, because these businesses, they have huge HR budgets and marketing budgets, much smaller CSR. So no, that's really interesting.
Exactly.
In terms of, before I ask you more questions about partnerships and collaboration and things, just tell us a bit about your Formula E stuff, because that's so cool.
Yeah, sure. So a big dream of mine as a kid was, I was always competitive, right? So
No, really?
always so competitive. So it started off with two wheels. I don't know if you ever remember, I was that kid that would be riding the bike, would crush a can, put it on the back wheel in order for it to make the sound as if it was a motorbike or so. So that was like a big thing for me. And then I went from that 2 wheels to 4 wheels. And go-karting was a key thing for me in Burgess Park in South London. And then from that point, it closed down, and there's a BMX track there. There's some Olympians actually, from that BMX track. And I said, look, if I can't be inside of the car and race, I'll be outside of the car and work to build it. And that's what led me to study engineering at GCSE. And then when I came to first year of university at UCL, studying mechanical engineering and programming, I started to volunteer for this group called Formula Student. And Formula Student is the gateway to Formula One. My first year I volunteered, second year I volunteered, third year I volunteered. I tried to anyway. I tried to do it as a project, and I was rejected. And that led me to essentially go to Rolls-Royce instead. After they also rejected me the first time, I got in the second time and then redesigned a component in their jet engines and saved them £50 million. And then as a result of that, that's when Lewis heard about my work through One Young World, and then popped me an email in August of 2020 to essentially,
You
which
got
I
an
thought was spam,
email out
which
of
I
the
thought
blue
was spam. Yeah,
from
out
Lewis
of the blue,
Hamilton.
out of the blue.
Oh my, that is such, I
Uh,
didn't know that. You've never told me that.
yeah.
That is so awesome.
Yeah. And I realized that he was setting up the board and he was also setting up this race team. So I essentially pitched for Motives to support them with getting engineers and mechanics to support this team because he was trying to show that diversity and excellence go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
And I was very much aligned with that vision. So I said I would help. And then he said, well, why don't you put your CV in because you had been doing all this stuff beforehand. And then this Mercedes and X44 said I had the best CV there. So why don't you come to preseason testing and see how you find it? So I started off with the Extreme E Championship. That was the big one for me. And I started off as a junior engineer, then performance engineer, where we won the championship. So from being rejected from Formula student in third year to winning the championship in my second year was absolutely insane. And then my third year, I've kind of been running that car within that championship. And yeah, now I'm in the process of designing a race car to beat a lap record. But that is
That's
news
highly
that I can't
confidential
necessarily share,
information.
highly
Yeah, you can't talk
confidential.
about
But
that.
yeah,
I
that
can
is
imagine.
that's been the journey so far. But it's allowed me to go around the world, explore areas that are affected by climate change with this electric car and almost superimpose a potential solution onto the different problems and we use that as a vehicle actually for the kids to show them what a career in sustainability could look like. It's not
Yeah.
just what you like, we're really bringing it to life and with the most coolest role that I think you can probably have in STEM as a race engineer. So yeah.
How do you find, because you work 2.5 days a week for Formula
Yeah.
E and 2.5 days a week you're running Motives. How do you find the juggle of that?
So the great thing is, as soon as I joined, so when I was at the table and we were trying to negotiate all the contracts and everything, I was like, look, my best and highest use isn't just to be an engineer. You've got a great opportunity here to use a global platform to inspire tens, hundreds of thousands to get into STEM. And I very much do this, and I've been doing this for years already. This is only going to amplify that work. So with enough flexibility, more than happy to continue to make, deliver results on the track. I have to deliver
Yeah.
results unless it doesn't work, but also make sure that we get as many thousands of young people into STEM so that they can become, get the jobs, but also become ambassadors and change makers in the process and essentially follow my journey and make it even better. So that has worked out well because they all understand the vision. So Lewis and his team and everyone kind of understands the journey that I've been on. So they're always supporting. And it means that when there's a race, as soon as I come back, for example, I do nothing to do with racing. It's all focused on Motives, and we kind of just counterbalance as best as we can. And now, thankfully, with all the support, there's a great team that make all the magic happen whilst I'm away. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So going back to Motives, because I mean, it can't be easy trying to juggle it, but you make it sound, and I'm sure it's not. But going back to Motives, you now got 10 staff.
Yes, 10 staff.
And one of the things that I know that you find challenging, because we were talking about it and I was agreeing with you, it is really challenging, particularly I think now post-COVID, is the kind of hiring and managing in a world where it's remote, not remote. There's huge amounts of damage, I think, that is as yet kind of very badly understood on the effect that COVID had on a cohort of young people who had to do university remotely, had to start jobs remotely, and how, there are just huge amounts of bits of life experience that they missed out on, and we kind of didn't realize quite how important those things, I think, as a society were. But how, in terms of your team, do you have any kind of observations of things that, or thoughts on what works, what doesn't work, and just in terms of what are the things that really keep you awake at night around keeping Motives together?
That's a great question. I would say 2020. I'm not sure about you, but we were hiring then 2020, 2021, and you could get thousands of applications
Yeah,
like that. It was
yeah,
relatively straightforward, and give it 2 years on from that, and
yeah,
now those job ads aren't flying as they used to. So
yeah,
I found that to be very, very difficult. So we've been trying to enlist as much support as we could. We actually just got a 100K dollars from LinkedIn for just ads to just
yeah.
promote
But that's
opportunities,
amazing. Yeah,
recruit mentors and stuff like that. So from that perspective, that has been a key problem. So we've tried to find partners that can support. So they've given
yeah,
us ad credits in order to do that. So hopefully things should change, but that's
yeah,
what some organizations might be able to benefit from on the core, others that you might know of. I would highly recommend them applying because they do that every quarter. Started in the
yeah.
US, but now it's a global initiative.
I
Uh,
yeah, I didn't know
so
that. We should look into that.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I
But
found
I
it's
have to say,
been very difficult. Go for it.
sorry, I'm relieved to hear that you find it difficult as well, because we find it really hard. And
Very
we've
difficult.
just had a long conversation this morning about how we really need to completely look again at our advertising, because we used to just be quite lazy about it because it worked really well,
Yeah,
using
you could.
LinkedIn
Yeah,
and going to the different people that we funded and whatever. And we got really broad range of candidates, and we got some really great people coming through. And it doesn't work anymore. We're going to have to put a lot more effort in a time when it's really hard to put a lot more effort, because effort means money. So yeah,
exactly,
it's hard. Why,
exactly.
do you have any thoughts on why that is? Why it is the case that it's
I
harder?
I would say at the moment, generally speaking, and what I'm seeing, because thankfully I'm Gen Z as well, so just at the upper end, at the limit, right? But I get to see the perspectives. For
Yeah,
example, I'll give you an example. So someone joins the team, and then once they join the team, they are like hammering on everything to do with like loo days or this policy or that policy or not working any extra hair or not. And which is good, right? They're taking full ownership of that contract. Whereas
yeah,
maybe before you just sign and you just get on with it. There was a fear that, you needed to really appease your employer. Whereas I think now the optionality is really on their side, especially if they're a great candidate, right?
yeah,
They know that there's so many other firms that are probably going to want them. I tried to extend an offer to someone yesterday, literally yesterday, and I'm still waiting to hear back, holding my fingers. So that's just how it goes. At the
yeah,
moment, I think they've got a lot more leverage
yeah,
than whereas before the employers had a lot more leverage to really choose and so forth. So now it's a bit different. It's a different climate, and in order to find the candidates that are trained, that have that initiative, what we call the Motivez mindset, that have that
yeah,
is few and far between. So it's almost like you're competing for a smaller pool of people that are really trained, that have that initiative. And you can go for others, but they're probably just not exactly at the level that you want them to be. But for us, we've just invested a lot of time in our onboarding to make it as
yeah,
effective as possible, get them into the office when we can, so that we can upskill them as best as possible. That has been
yeah.
our main goals, and tweaking job descriptions to make it as relatable as we can. But yeah, still difficult, I would say.
Yeah, I know. I agree. It's really, we find that too, and just trying to create the right office environment. And we
Exactly.
are in the office quite a lot because we need to be, but making sure that we find people who want to come into the office as well and really enjoy that, is
Exactly.
a key part of the recruitment process as well. I think, is making sure that I've just seen what time it is, and I want to make sure that if anybody's would like to ask a question, I have lots more questions, and I will keep going, but please do jump in if you've got any, if anyone would like to come on camera and ask a question, please do just go for it. But while people have a think about that, George, I would love to hear a little bit more from you about partnerships and collaboration. You clearly do a lot of that,
Mm,
but it is challenging, because
definitely.
I think, and it's something that funders particularly don't really understand, is that it costs money. doing partnerships and collaboration. They all want everybody to collaborate, but they don't realize how expensive it is because it takes so much time. So I love that. Sandra, you look, would you like to ask a question? You've popped up on my screen.
Yes, hello. Hi there, George. We've previously spoken. Just one quick question. As a school engagement person for McDonald, what's one message you would give to a young person now, especially from an underrepresented background in the current climate? You know, where it's competitive and where we're still trying to...
That is a great question.
Yeah.
Two things come to mind. So one is general and one is very specific. I don't know if, okay, you froze. I wasn't too sure if I froze. But two things that come to mind. The first thing that I would say is getting as well, the initiative point, I think, is the big thing. So getting as much skin in the game. Everyone's got, you know, a lot of people will have a degree, let's say. A lot of people would have done the subjects that you're doing. If it's like an engineering or tech role, you generally speaking want to have shown some element of initiative by doing projects and because if CV is so easy to just see a candidate and be like, okay, they don't have the level of experience that we want, because now it's so difficult. You really want to make sure you're making the right decision as well, especially an organization like ours, but I'm sure with any of these engineering or tech firms. So there's an element of initiative by doing projects and being a doer. I don't know any other way to put it, but I think there's, of course, a bit of an entitlement period that we're in at the moment where people feel like, oh yeah, they should just be able to get the job once they apply, because, you know, LinkedIn, you've got easy apply, just press a button and you think that's your application done, right? But I think now we need to be more doers. And then the second thing that I would say, so basically showing more of your work is the first point. And the second point that I would say that is more of a general statement, which should help them with that, is if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. I would say that's the biggest thing. If they realize that they have a voice, and if their voice is not present in the rooms that they want to be in, someone else is going to make the decision for them. I think that would allow them to take on more volunteering opportunities, find more ways of essentially being active and participating. You know, we had hundreds of thousands of people just sign up to vote, for example, because we know if we want to change anything, you need to use your voice. You need to be at the table. So yeah, that's my 2 pence.
That's great. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, that's a kind of just general, I think, fantastic call to action for all of us, not just young people. It's like, use your voice, use your vote, use your use every opportunity you have to talk about things. So going back to the partnerships and collaboration question.
Yes.
So to kind of put a question more specifically around that, do you think that there is more that could be done to help stimulate more collaboration, and would it make a real difference?
Definitely. So I've got two different perspectives, but they kind of join up together. I wonder whether we should read Kumaran's question. Maybe that might link.
Yeah, we at London Basketball Association. Hi, Kumaran. It's nice to have you here. As a sports charity, have multiple certification courses along with employability opportunities for the community. Wanted to know how we could collaborate, partner with you, George, and see if we can create impact. That is, pretty.
Sure.
Let's answer that as a general.
Yes, I think we can. Sorry, I'll just put my email there. There's also, if you just CC, then it'll go to the rest of the team. But yes, I'll answer your question, Mary, first, and I'll kind of integrate those. So in terms of what funders can do and different supporters, I would say when it comes to partnerships, you almost need capacity in order to build partnerships, right? So you want to build the capacity of the organization, but that's partly because they also need to, in order to make some systemic change from a funder perspective, you need to be able to make all your charities or so forth that you're funding collaborate in some way in order to, unless you're not making the most of your finances, essentially. So I'm on the board of the Co-op Foundation. We bring our partners together to have essentially, well, the monitoring and evaluation is a big part of it, but also just to learn what one another are doing, to learn different techniques, but also find ways to collaborate with one another. Because if we don't do that, then we're just going to be investing in another organization to solve the problem. But realistically, they all need to come together. So I think I've mentioned it before, but it's almost like an arc of some sort where it's like, we've got grassroots programs here, employability programs here, and there's some people that might be able to support us on the grassroots side and would mean that we don't have to do that work and we can come together. And I think that is so important. So, for example, we even work with the Sutton Trust at the moment because we've got some programs that we're doing. They don't have much STEM employers. We do. So for the young people that are interested in STEM, they now, after they finish working with them at the A-level stage, come to us and they come into our program. So it means less time recruiting, so less money that we have to spend on marketing, and we can focus more on delivery and making a deep impact. Yeah. So it's finding organizations on that arc. But in order to get that done, funders almost need to find ways to convene their charities, and which cost, essentially. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it as a funder, just bring them together and find ways that they can essentially make some magic happen.
That's a really lovely and a very easy thing funders can do. And in some ways, probably potentially easier, because I know that a lot of funders find it hard, if they've got systems in place and it's quite hard for them to make kind of unrestricted grants with not obvious outcomes to them.
Exactly.
What they can say is, let's put a pot together to pay for collaboration, convening opportunities. And, we'll be able to pay the expenses to get everyone together once a year or twice a year or whatever. And that's a really something that hopefully might be quite manageable for funders to do in a way that they can't do other things. And then, as they kind of see the success of that, it might be easier to do more. We are at time, but just before we finish, George, what does the future hold? What are you most excited about and what are you most worried about?
Great question. The future for me, so what I'm very excited about is to see, from a Motivez context anyway, I think it's just normalizing success as it pertains to underserved young people within these environments, because there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to excel like everyone else, right, in these spaces. And I've been able to do it in so many different ways, and which has been great. I've loved it, but I'm still an anomaly, right? And that is a problem. That's a very, very big problem. So it's really trying to build communities whereby this, that's no longer the case. And I do think that Motivez is one of those vehicles where we can build more ambassadors and more change makers. So we can see this virtuous cycle of people going through our programs and then people, becoming youth advisory board members, becoming trustees, then people going on to sometimes set up their own initiatives or support their employee resource groups within their firms and just drive that change. Because essentially, if we don't do that, then we're just going to be in the same place. So I'm very excited to see what that looks like. From our perspective, we've got a new system whereby we have Motivez members that are bronze, silver, and gold, and it depends on their level of engagements that they've attended, but also their level of service within the Motivez community. So you can only get to gold with an active service for the community, and really tracking each individual member so that they can make the most impact possible, and we can get this virtuous cycle. So that's a big thing that I'm excited about. And your next one was what is worrying me at the moment, or what I'm concerned about? I would say still having faith, despite what has happened over the last few years, where funders and different people are focusing more on their strategic priorities, that people would realize that, organizations like ourselves that are still at that point of step change, we just need a few more, but not to kind of, not to go so deep in their strategic priorities that they forget the work that we're doing is so impactful. So to not keep an open mind, I think for some funders, I think that would probably be my biggest thing. Because when they did, we were able to make a massive impact. And yeah, I would like that to continue. So yeah, that worries me a bit to see it changing.
When you say kind of deep into their strategic priorities, as in funders getting really specific and too specific, and therefore actually ending up writing people out of that, writing charities out of their criteria by being absolutely.
Exactly. Because so many organizations, for example, they haven't written much grant application before. They haven't done, and that does not testify to how great their work can be. So it's finding a way to continue to go on that journey with them. You know, we've had funders that rejected us 6 months ago that are now with us now. And that for me is a massive win, because it shows that person was open-minded to explore and have the conversation.
Yeah. So basically, as funders, don't just fund the people with the best fundraisers, dig a bit deeper and look at what they're doing on the ground. Yeah. I wish we completely agree with that, and try very hard through our application process, as you know, to support applicants through it. But anyway, George, it's 1:50. Thank you so much indeed. Got some really, really lovely comments in the chat, which we will show you afterwards, if you haven't had time to read them, about how inspiring this has been. And we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel, so we will also be circulating it around to lots of people. And so anyone who hasn't been able to come today will be able to see it. But just like last thing to say is thank you so much, and have a really lovely weekend. And you and I are meeting in a couple of weeks, so I'm really looking forward to that, to talk about other things. But yeah, just thank you. What you're doing is amazing, and yeah, I'm so pleased and proud that we get to know you and get to help you in even the most tiny ways. So thank you.
No, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, for everyone that has joined the call today, appreciate you. Whether you've supported us before or you're considering, really appreciate your time this lunchtime. Hope you have a blessed weekend.
Thank you.